Let's set the scene here for a second. You're a man on a ship. You look out into the distance. There you see one of the, if not the most important event in all of human history occurring. There's fire shooting out of stone buildings, walls crumbling to the ground, and piers being torn up plank by plank. That city has stood for over 1,000 years and is being crumbled before your eyes. It was the last bastion of the Roman Empire and Byzantium. This is the fall of Constantinople back in 1453, and while the title of most important event is very much up for debate, what is considered a direct effect, what is just ripple through history, what was and was not caused by whatever, when it comes to the direct impacts of any singular event and their significance, Constantinople blows every single other event out of the water by a massive margin. Now, by far, the easiest way we could have Constantinople just not fall is by changing the Battle of Varna a couple years earlier in 1444. For those people who don't have context, there was a massive crusading army coming from Poland, Lithuania, Hungary, and parts of the Holy Roman Empire to push back the Ottoman. And it was so nearly successful. And I cannot understate how close this was to being successful. When I say it was feet away from changing the course of human history, that's not hyperbole. The crusading forces were a few feet away from the Sultan, and if they had made it and killed him, the Ottoman Empire would have collapsed right then and there, because there was not a clear heir lined up for that empire. It would have fractured and became an obscure footnote in history. Byzantium would have been able to keep surviving, and the world would be completely unrecognizable. But that idea has been done and redone by channels much better, with better production quality than mine, so I'm not going to go over that. What I will be going over, however, is how the battle that led to the fall of Constantinople, those 50-odd days before that time, could have been changed in order to have a Byzantine Roman victory in that battle. To start off, we can go over what went well in that battle that we could keep the same to give Byzantium the best advantage. First of all, bombards were not nearly as effective as people think that they were. Usually, when you see a cannon the size of an apartment building, you think, yeah, that's probably going to do a lot of damage. That's almost certainly the reason that they lost. When in reality, it's way more nuanced than just they blew a massive hole in the wall, got into the city, and won. Those cannons, you need to understand how big they were, how heavy, the amount of weight they're shooting out, that there's a ton of energy packed into one of those cannons, which means after you shoot it, that barrel is going to get so incredibly hot that if any time in the next 7 hours you shot it, the barrel would melt. You could use this once per 7 hours. Because of this, it meant it shot once, right? And it's hitting this flat, solid wall. Beforehand, the Byzantines and Genoese, who were helping out the Byzantine, because the Genoese had a direct stake in how well Byzantium was doing, they used their ports, they used their trade routes, so they had a very big interest in making sure Byzantium stayed alive, had tried to put these massive cushion almost like things on top of the walls, so that when the bombard would hit it, it would absorb it and hopefully not shatter the wall. If you could think you're sending so many tons of force just barreling into one of those, it's doing practically nothing to stop one of those cannonballs. Which means, yeah, the first time when it hits a solid flat wall, that's what a cannon is built to hit. It's just going to hit that, penetrate right through, crumble that section of the wall. But the issue is, then you're giving the defenders another 7 hours to repair that section of wall before you can fire again. And in 7 hours, you have a city of thousands of people who are all desperately trying to survive. It's more than likely, and we see this happen very, very often, that they would just run over to that section and be able to repair it to not full strength, but very good strength after that 7 hours by using the rubble from the wall and just any leftover materials. They would build palisades on top, so it would go back to being a very formidable defensive structure. The only difference is the bombard is going to exponentially decrease its effectiveness, because now instead of hitting a solid flat wall, it's going to be getting caught by rubble and dirt, and it's just going to sink into it instead of hitting it, meaning after the first couple bombardments by these massive cannons, they're not really going to have as big of an effect. The second part then that we can add on to this is probably one of, if not the biggest part of siege warfare in this time was tunnels. You're going to look at times, hell, 200, 300 years in the future from now, you're still seeing people trying to dig tunnels under walls to get into the city. Well, that's more of a misconception. You're not trying to get into the city, you're trying to go under the wall, and then one of two things would happen. A, you would clear off enough space under the wall just by mining that then you'd take out all of the supports rapidly, and the ground under that wall would collapse, bringing the wall with it, taking out that entire section of the fortress. Or B, you would just plant a crap ton of explosives just directly under the wall, set them all off, and boom, you just got this massive hole in the wall and it works great. The only issue is Byzantium had some of the best miners in the world, if not the best miners in the world at that time. So when the Ottoman would try to go under the Byzantine walls to blow them up or collapse them, their miners would be sitting there, and what they would do is they would have these massive jugs of water. And what would happen is, from all of the dozens of people digging, chipping into stone, it would create a lot of vibrations that would shake the water. So the Byzantines could use the water to triangulate the location of where those people are mining from, intercept them, kill them all, and go back into their walls after shutting off that tunnel, making almost none, if any, of those mining trips actually successfully. I tried to look deeper into this to get more specific numbers. I couldn't find any guaranteed example of a mine actually going off under the Byzantine walls. I'm sure it might have happened, but it's extremely rare, if at all, that it happened successfully. And the next part of this is going to be that Byzantium, again, had some of the, if not, again, the best soldiers in the world. While their numbers were minuscule, they barely had any soldiers. They had maybe 7,000 people who could actually fight and had armor or any kind of weapon, versus an army of, it varies in how much people say the Ottoman forces had. At minimum 60,000, and when I say that's a conservative estimate, I mean extremely conservative estimate. That's would be a mere fraction of what they would likely have. It's going to range up to, from the first-hand accounts I've heard, which of course aren't usually extremely accurate, because if I lost the battle, I'm going to want to say, oh, the enemy, they had so many incredibly skilled troops that, of course I lost. It wasn't up to me. It wasn't my fault. It was destined to happen. That first-hand records would say they probably had about 50,000 soldiers per wave and 3 waves, so maybe 150,000 soldiers at the most, 60,000 at the least. The real number's probably 100,000-ish, maybe a little bit more, but somewhere in that range. So you're gonna see 10 to 15 times the amount of Ottoman soldiers as Greek soldiers and Genoese soldiers, but they were very, very well trained. The Genoese crossbowmen and mercenaries in particular, where the Genoese mercenaries, what they were the best at probably was A, wall defense, because they had these crossbows that could fire very powerfully, very far, that they could go on the walls and just fire out at the Ottoman from this massive distance, which, is nice, but it's not going to be super effective. What they were the best at is the Ottoman would constantly be sending out probing attacks at the walls. And, of course, just real quick, if you don't know what a probing attack is, it's not like a full attack, it's just getting an idea of where the weak points are. And the Ottoman would do this fairly regularly. And what the Genoese would do is, instead of just waiting on the walls, sitting for an attack, the moment that the Ottoman entered the moat in front of the walls, they would rush down there to meet them head on and repelled them, I believe, every time. The only attack that was actually successful by the Ottoman was that final attack where they were able to breach the walls and burn the city down, of course. And this is going to be reflected in the final part of these good things in the battle, where if you look at the casualty numbers, it's just not even close. It's nowhere near close, because the Byzantine only had 7,000 soldiers to lose total, and if you look at it, the casualty numbers are insane. The Byzantine lost way, way less than the Ottoman did, to a point where if they had double, triple the amount of soldiers they actually did, hell, they could have won this battle easily without any other changes if they just had a couple more soldiers. But I'll throw a couple of the numbers up on screen so you could get a better idea of what I'm talking about. But the casualty figures and how well the Greeks actually did is mind-boggling, especially considering their circumstances. From here, we can get into more exactly how the Greeks or Romans could have won this battle. What precautions, what effects could they have tried to get in or just barely before this battle when they knew it was a guaranteed thing, because a couple probably months, I believe, before this battle, everybody knew the Ottoman were going to try to take over the Byzantine for years before this. Ever since the Byzantine were surrounded by the Ottoman having land in both Anatolia and the Balkans, it was fairly evident what their plan was. But especially after Varna, when the Ottoman and the Crusaders knew, we can't come help these Byzantine anymore, they're on their own. Everybody knew there was going to be some massive attack by the Ottoman on the Byzantine. So, leading up to that, in those months before the battle, we can make one massive change that on its own may or may not have the ability to change the outcome of the battle. This major change is going to be coordination between the Byzantine in the east and the Pope in the west. While in our own timeline, we saw coordination between the Pope and the Emperor, it was way too late to have an actual effect. In the end, a couple papal ships, a couple soldiers, mostly just a bit of resources, were sent over, and while, yeah, that's great at extending the fight because now we have more food, we can hang on for longer, that's not gonna win us anything. Whereas, if before that point, there would be one massive change, which, for the record, this is completely accurate, this is what they were trying to do, it was just earlier, they were working towards uniting the Western Church and the Eastern Church so that the West would come and help out the East. And of course, when you look at how popular this decision would have been, its ratings would be absolutely abysmal. Nobody in their right mind in the East would actually believe in what the West was saying. They hated the Pope, they didn't like the West. Well, yeah, here or there, they'd be like, oh yeah, you can come and crusade, help us out. They didn't actually believe in any of that. But the Emperor had realized the logistics of the situation and how if they want to beat the Ottoman, they're going to need a lot of Western soldiers because they just don't have the numbers. When you look at the populations of Constantinople, it is by far at its lowest point. This is a very dark hour for Constantinople, and that's why it fell. Because leading up to this, you had the worst events in Constantinople history happen. You had the Black Death come through and just wipe out most of the city's population. And even before and after that, you're going to have the Crusades coming through here. And while initially, like the First Crusade, helped Byzantium, ones after that, in fact, invaded Byzantium, invaded Constantinople, and burnt the city to the ground, trying to turn it into a Latin kingdom, which is what they did down in Athens, where the Latins had a lot more control. And even before this battle, Athens is not something we can really take into account, that entire area down in southern Greece, because the Ottoman made sure before this battle to go down into that region, kick them around a bit, make sure they weren't going to be able to come and break the siege, so that's a non-factor in this scenario. But back to what I was saying, realistically, if we have the Pope sending more men, more supplies, and more ships earlier, it might actually be able to make a change. Because the Pope is really the only possible ally that Byzantium could be seeking in this war, except for maybe one. But I'll get to that later. That's going to be my final point of how they could have won, and it's going to be by far the largest point. That's the only real change that could drastically change the outcome. But when you look at it, the other Catholic kingdoms, or how the other Christian kingdoms, were all incredibly busy, incredibly weak, right? Because at this point, you're going to see France just coming out of the 100 Years' War. They're going to be crippled. They are in absolutely no condition to go across the Mediterranean and help out a kingdom that, well, not kingdom, empire, or city-state, I guess at this point, that looks like it's going to fall anyway. That's just not even close to being in the cards. And when you look over at Spain, the other big Catholic kingdom on that side of Europe, they're busy trying to take over the rest of Iberia. And well, yeah, theoretically, could they stop that to go help out the Byzantine? Yeah, but that would just completely go against all Spanish interests. Why would I stop fighting for my survival? Why would I put down my arms, put myself in a terrible situation to go help out a crumbling empire that's been on the decline for over 1,000 years in a land I've never been to that barely affects me, when I could be making money in Iberia by stabbing a bunch of Muslim people instead? It just doesn't make sense. And the other Catholic nations is going to be Poland, which is a very big Christian nation, and, they had a lot of support for Byzantium, actually, as, again, in 1444, they were the main force, them and the Hungarians, who were coming down to try to free the Byzantine. But they had lost their king in that battle. That is part of the reason why that is so significant, is that not only did they lose that battle and their last chance at saving Byzantium, they lost their king in the process. And that was the most important king that didn't do anything important, is a good way to phrase that, where he had the potential to make the next Habsburg dynasty hell bigger than the Habsburg dynasty. He single-handedly controlled Lithuania, Poland, Hungary, and parts of the Holy Roman Empire. If he had been able to survive and win that battle, and then also had major influence over Byzantium, who he just helped saved, that would have been the most important king in all of history. But he just died, leaving all of these regions without a real leader, except for Hungary, who had John Hunyadi, but we'll get to him later. So really, there was no one in a position to come help them, so the Pope is going to be the main spot that they can look for help. And if they got that help, things might be different. Now, this second point is what I was talking about, the one nation that could help them, and yes, it's going to slightly contradict what I said earlier, but the only way that you really see a Byzantine victory in this battle is if Hungary comes to bail them out. While, yes, Hungary had just lost their heir. They had just lost the king in Varna. Realistically, Hunyadi, who was the biggest Hungarian general, one of the most important, I should say, generals in all of history, he had very major control over Hungary, and realistically, if anyone was going to save Byzantium, it would have been Hungary, as he had just partially tried to do that not too long ago. He might be able to try to come down and save them. And this is really the part where it's going to diverge, because in the battle itself for Constantinople between the Romans and the Ottoman, everybody thought, or a lot of soldiers on the Ottoman side, I should say, thought that any day now there's a massive force from Hungary that was going to arrive and come and kill them all and break the siege, and everyone, Greek and Hungarian, was going to be happy, and the Ottoman were just going to completely die. Because that's what happened not too long ago. It's not an unreasonable thing to say, hey, the Hungarians hate us, they're probably going to come help their enemy out, like they just did a decade ago, not even. That if that army was actually real, if those foundations were true, and they actually came down to help Byzantium, that would have completely changed the battle. As I was saying earlier, how effective Byzantium was at holding off these Ottoman advancements, that they were doing very, very well in the battle, up to that final push by the Ottoman, because at that final push, the Ottoman pretty much just gave up and said, fuck it, we'll use numbers. We'll use meat shields. Their first attack was just 50,000 very poorly trained, mostly like ex-citizen soldiers who were just blindly told, run at the Greeks, try not to die. And what happened? They all fucking died. And they started running away because they were getting slaughtered by the Greeks. And the Ottoman told their cannons to open up on their own retreating soldiers until they started to turn around and attack again. That's how desperate the situation was, that these people just didn't want to fight the Greeks. And they had to fire at their own soldiers to get them to attack the Greeks again. That's how good the Greeks were doing at holding off these attacks. And like we were saying, the Pope in this situation would be coming over with more resources, more men, more ships, that can hopefully hold on a bit longer. Maybe the Genoese repel a couple more of those probing attacks so that this massive Hungarian army is able to make it down there in time. Now, is this the most realistic thing? Was Hungary in a situation where they wanted to go help out Byzantium? No, that just wasn't in the cards. But I wouldn't say it's impossible. And if we want a scenario where they beat the Ottoman, where they win, that's really just going to be the best case scenario. Now, there is one other scenario I can think of that would allow Constantinople and Rome to continue to survive after this battle. And that would be if a massive civil conflict broke out in the Ottoman Empire. And you might be like, well, that's just a cop-out, and that wasn't going to happen. You can't just say, oh, well, this country actually collapses randomly, and, well, now they win, right? But around this time, the Ottoman Empire was really racing to beat them, the Greeks that is, not only because they thought there might be a massive Hungarian army on the way, but they were going through a lot of civil unrest and civil troubles themselves. They had on their other side of their empire, they needed to go quash a rebellion, and they needed to do it fairly quickly, or else they would end up in a much worse position. Because like I was saying earlier about Varna and its significance, the Sultan didn't have a clear heir, and well, technically he did. Mehmed II was his son who was going to be it. He was very highly doubted, because he was extremely young when he was put into a position of power. Originally, his dad before him, who was the Sultan, tried to step down because he just didn't want to deal with it anymore, wanted to run away to his penthouse with his harem. But they didn't let him do that. They forced him to come back, fight at Varna, which almost ended up very badly, but just barely didn't. That most generals, most relatives didn't believe Mehmed was cut out for this position, so they were just biting at it, that any chance that they had, they would stage a rebellion and try to take over the nation. And, Byzantium may or may not have had just a tiny little part in that, where they, in fact, had Mehmed's brother, and their hope was, well, if Mehmed's looking like he's going to attack us, we could just release his brother, and, maybe he could start a rebellion, civil war, and, they'll be too busy with that to come and attack us. That didn't really work. The brother, he got executed in Constantinople by the Ottoman, I believe. Don't quote me on that one, but I think that's what happened, that he wasn't really able to create the civil war. But if he had, that would have been a very different situation, where I don't think Constantinople would have gotten out of that completely independent. I think they might have been turned into a vassal state, because part of this entire thing that I'm saying about, the Greeks were doing pretty good, you might be like, well, yeah, but that might be a little unfounded. Well, the Ottoman, many times, up to this point, like at least 2 or 3, had come up to the Byzantine suggesting peace deals. And not too long from the battle itself, not too far before it starting, the emperor had actually offered to the Ottoman, to the best of my knowledge this is, that he was willing to not necessarily work with the Ottoman, as he still hated the Ottoman more than anybody else. They were invading his country, killing his people. Yeah, he hated them, but he was willing to be a autonomous vassal state, where he was willing to pay reparations and give them money in return for staying independent. Well, of course, the Ottoman didn't take this. They decided to invade instead. During the battle itself, many times they said, well, if you surrender now, we'll let you all keep your positions, you'll just be part of the empire, it's not even a big deal. And Constantine said, go to hell, you can take that suggestion of peace and shove it up your ass. He was like, absolutely not, I tried to work it out diplomatically before, and I plan on dying in the city now. And then after that, they said, well, it's not looking too good for you guys, maybe you can surrender now. You won't be able to keep your positions, but we won't burn anything, we won't kill anybody, it'll be all grand, you'll just be part of the Ottoman Empire now. Now, suggesting peace, saying, I want to peace out, is typically one of the ways in history a nation is saying, yeah, I'm winning, but I don't know for how long I can keep that up, and I'd much rather just end this, not have to deal with it, than keep fighting. And if there was this major rebellion, or possibly even up to a civil war in the Ottoman Empire at this time, very quickly you might see that peace talk that, well, we'll let you keep your positions, just be part of the Ottoman Empire, become, you guys can keep your positions, you guys can keep doing everything the same, just pay us reparations. That's not a far jump, it's not as far of a jump as you might think it would be. So that is another possible scenario I could see Byzantium not necessarily remaining fully independent, but still having a state, still having an empire to fight behind. Now, this is already a very long video. If you look at my other videos, well, this is my first video actually using my voice, because that's just not something, I had the time or ability to do. Usually I just type out a script and then have a different thing read it for me, because I just don't have the capabilities to read. Like right now I'm just in my closet reading, or not reading even, just talking off the top of my knowledge. But this is going to be a way longer video than what I normally make. My other videos, the longest one was like not even 7 minutes. I'm recording right now, I'm already past the 30-minute mark, so this video is probably going to end up being somewhere around 40, but this is the part where we start really going into this scenario, but I might not be able to go in too long, just because of the time constraints. But this change, where we have Byzantium not fall, or even just not fully be part of the Ottoman Empire, would have ramifications we can't even begin to understand. The fall of Constantinople single-handedly, gave a massive, when I say massive, I mean massive, boost to the Renaissance. While, yes, the Renaissance would probably happen in some capacity anyway, the fall of Constantinople is what made the Renaissance recognizable. You know, there were other events like the Spanish. They had kicked the Jews and the Muslims out of Spain so that they could be more Catholic, right? And that would almost certainly have helped push the Renaissance anyway, as you're going to have thousands of very educated Jews and Muslims finding refuge in Italy from Spain, and they're going to bring their knowledge and their intellect with them, and they're going to be able to help kick off that kind of revolution or that kind of spirit that the Renaissance had, as well as other factors such as trade reopening in general, as the Black Death had very much shut down trade in Europe. That around this time, you're going to see them start coming out of that, so more ideas are going to flow. You're going to see the Renaissance, start being picked back up. But the main part of the Renaissance was just that, the rebirth, and that was the rebirth of old Greek and Roman knowledge. And let's go through this really quick. If you're looking for a bunch of Greek and Roman knowledge, where do you think all of that's going to be? It's all in Constantinople. So the moment Constantinople falls, you're going to see two things happen. A, the Ottoman are going to see all these old books, the Ottoman scholars, and they're going to be like, I think these Romans were onto something. And then with the trade reopening, all of these Ottoman who now have the old ideas are going to spread those ideas back with the Italians. The Italians, they're going to rediscover and rebirth their culture, and that's really going to add on to the Renaissance, along with Greeks, who there's going to be two main events of Greeks fleeing the Ottoman to go over to Italy. You're going to have the fall of Thessaloniki a couple years beforehand, again, where Thessaloniki was the second biggest Byzantine city, especially around this time. It was, I believe, Venetian, I want to say, but it was partially Venetian, partially Byzantine, that it's going to have a lot of the Byzantine nobles actually in it. So when they saw the writing on the wall a couple of years beforehand, Thessaloniki, it's going to fall. Thessaloniki itself was actually almost a microcosm of the fall of Constantinople. It was pretty much everything, just on a much smaller scale. You're going to see all of these nobles running away, seeing the writing on the wall, going to Italy, and bringing all of their ancient Roman and Greek texts, all of their fancy old world ideas with them, which is going to be completely rebirthed over in Italy. And then, of course, with the fall of Constantinople itself, you're going to see that, but on a much, much wider scale. You're going to see all of these texts be brought over, while there's a by far majority more people in Constantinople, as in this time, Constantinople was a mere fraction of what it used to be. It's still one of the biggest cities in the world at this time. The only places that could rival it would be maybe the New World in the Americas, like the Mississippian or the Mayas might have something around the same size. Even like Paris, London are nowhere close to Constantinople, even after it's a fraction of its size. Rome is completely destroyed, it's a shadow of its former self. So all of these people, all of this knowledge is just going to flood back into Italy, kicking off the Renaissance. And without the Renaissance, all of modern history is just completely different. You don't have the same spread of ideas, and it's possible even that this would completely butterfly effect away major changes such as the Protestant Reformation. Without the Protestant Reformation, you don't have the 30 Years' War. Without the 30 Years' War, you don't have Westphalia and the idea of a classical nation in the modern sense. By making this one city not fall 600 years ago, we might not even have the idea of a nation that we have today, with the laws controlling the people and the king being the head of the state. Those were all relatively vague ideas that came out of the 30 Years' War. And of course, after that, you're not going to have any of the effects of those same nations. You're not going to have the 7 Years' War. You're not going to have the American or French revolutions. You're not going to have a republic in the modern sense develop at all. And this is just completely changing history. Along with the next most important thing, if not the most important thing, coming out of the fall of Constantinople being the discovery of the Americas. People understate how important the discovery of the Americas are. No, I haven't really heard somebody give it the correct, proper credit for how important it was for human society as a whole, as it really set in stone which countries were going to be important for the rest of history. England got its big jump out of the discovery of the Americas and the Age of Exploration, where they're going to have the American colonies, they're going to have Canada, they're going to have India, all out of the Age of Exploration, which was directly kicked off by the Renaissance and the fall of Constantinople, which the Renaissance is itself tied back to the fall of Constantinople again. And this is going to see an unprecedented age of global Spanish hegemony where they control almost all of the Americas. They are so incredibly rich as a nation that they're the dominant force for easily 100, 200 years, up until you're going to see at the end of the 30 Years' War, the end of the 80 Years' War, is going to be when they start to fall off because they spent all of their money and they're losing these major wars. But even in the 30 Years' War and the 80 Years' War, they were a massive force to be reckoned with. Like, look at the battles like Nordling, where this, big, scary Swedish army, and then the Spanish show up and just completely wipe the floor with them at that battle. If the 80 Years' War and the 30 Years' War hadn't been simultaneous, it's very possible that Spain could have won either one, and just been this massive power that they were. And then you're also going to see France. Out of this age of exploration, France is going to become an even bigger power, because you're going to see Louis XVI, who itself comes out of the age of exploration and the 30 Years' War. Louis XVI was a very Renaissance 30 Years' War figure with his major control, plus the Americas and all of that brought to France. It's going to become this massive dominant power for really the rest of history. Up until World War I, they are the biggest, most strong land army, and it's only when Germany, a nation that has never, barely even been a concept for thousands of years, becomes a nation that they finally get dethroned on land. And it is just, the entire course of human history has been butterflied away by this one single effect. In the short term, what we're going to see from this is, if Mehmed is completely defeated at this battle, right? So this would only be in the Crusader version of how Constantinople gets saved, is that Mehmed, this figure who is already unpopular, who's not trusted by the nobility, who his own family and generals are plotting against very regularly, you might see a collapse of the Ottoman Empire and a Byzantine resurgence from that. Would it be a massive Byzantine resurgence? No. This would not be that same kind of Varna victory. Where Varna, Byzantium, they were weak, but they weren't desolate. At this point, they had fought through probably what is, again, going to cripple their population, cripple their ability to make war, do everything like that. That it's going to be way harder for them to just quickly rebound, take back all of Greece, and take parts of Anatolia that you might see in a Varna situation, but you might see Serbia gain independence. Bulgaria maybe trying to gain independence as well. Albania can become a state again. The Duchy of Athens might be able to expand, and you might have like a bigger Attica. You might have the Byzantine be able to retake most of northern Greece, because at this point it would really be, it depends on how much the Hungarians are helping out. If the Hungarians come down there, break the siege, and then leave, you're just going to see more warlords just completely scattered throughout the Balkans, ex-Ottoman with their army still intact, versus if it was like a big Hungarian intervention where they're really trying to take over the Balkans. You're going to see all of it get wiped away, and you're going to see all of these Christian old world powers be able to retake that land. And then over in Anatolia, it depends on, again, how big the revolution is, or not revolution, I should say, rebellion or civil war. But you could either see the Sultan's brother, who very much liked Byzantium. Well, not liked, I should say. He was helped by Byzantium become in control, and how much that would have an effect, that can be up to debate, as especially in this period in politics, it's, I don't care who you are, I don't care if you're my own mother, I'm going to betray you if it helps me out. So they're probably not going to stay close relations with the Byzantine Empire for long, but it would be better than Mehmed. Or you could just see a complete splintering of the Ottoman Empire, which, again, if we go back to long-term effects, the Ottoman Empire is one of the most significant countries in all of history. It was able to control everything from the doorstep of Spain up to Vienna and to Crimea down to Egypt. It was one of the biggest, most important, effectful countries in all of history, and we just completely butterflied it away in the most extreme case scenario, where the world at this point is just completely unrecognizable. And we have this situation where, do I think Byzantium realistically can rebound? It will never reach the same extent, but I think this can easily expand their lifespan until we see another regional power come out of Anatolia or the Balkans. Because Bulgaria, the Bulgarian tribes, they've invaded the Byzantine Empire again and again and again, and they really just aren't organized or big enough to try to take down Byzantium. Even in this situation, once the walls are repaired, the Bulgarians really don't have a chance at breaking in through those walls. Serbia is mostly on the side of the Greeks. They're both Christian. They have very good relations in history. Well, yes, like I was saying, relations can change very quickly. They're similar to Bulgarians in the idea that they wouldn't be strong enough. And of course, the Duchy of Athens, a fellow Greek state, well, Greek and Latin, similar to Constantinople was at this time. They have relations, fairly good relations. I wouldn't expect to see them trying to come up and save, or not save, I mean come up and destroy Constantinople. That's just not in their cards. And of course, Anatolia, what we would see is, again, if the Ottoman Empire is still there in some form, they would likely be the next ones to try to take it again in definitely at least 100 years. Versus if it's just completely splintered, then we would need to wait for another state to try to do it. Because even then, the Greeks, they don't have the best foothold, but most of Anatolia is still very Greek around this time. And especially over in Trebizond, there was still a duchy that wasn't necessarily Byzantine, but it was ruled by Byzantine noble families, and with this resurgence, they could reopen up connections, and Armenia, and all of that. But the next power that could threaten them would likely be some other warlord state, like the Ottoman, that rise, unite all of Anatolia, try to do something about Byzantium. If not that, then possibly a Western army, another crusade type thing, where they just decide to sack Constantinople, because that's something that the West does very often in history. Or eventually Byzantium just fades into obscurity, where people aren't wanting the city as much, because it's really just a symbolic thing at that point. For example, everybody wanted Constantinople, even up until the 20s, with the Treaty of Severus, and everybody trying to take a little part out of the Ottoman Empire, that everybody still wanted Constantinople. The Russians did, the British did, the Greeks did, the Turks did. Everybody still wants it, even though it's not really that important of a city anymore, because, the world is now a much bigger space than just the Mediterranean. but it's very much a symbol of prestige, the world's desire, and how much that would stay. I believe, Byzantium would still have to deal with everyone trying to take Constantinople, just for the glory of saying, I'm the one who conquered Rome, I'm the one who took the big city of the world's desire, but there's not really a strategic advantage on the same level anymore. So I believe we can see a period where Rome's lifespan is extended by easily 100 years, and then depending on how Anatolia and the West shape out, possibly 200-300 years, because it's not impossible at all for a big Middle Eastern empire at this time to just keep hanging on for hundreds of years. Hell, the Ottoman were a big Middle Eastern ancient empire, not necessarily ancient, but very, very old medieval empire that was able to hold on until the 1910s and 1920s in very small pockets. Like, if Byzantium is able to have a full comeback here, where eventually over the next 100-200 years with Western aid, they're able to reunite all of Anatolia, it's not completely out of the realm of possibility that with major reforms, they can come back and possibly live later on into the 17 or 1800s. Now, of course, this is going on way too far. We don't know who the next Byzantine emperor would have been, and it's not necessarily out of the question to say Byzantium just collapses not too long after. Because at this time, like I was saying in the beginning of the video, that entire thing where the East and the Western churches were uniting would have been extremely unpopular. And even they had tried to get it passed in their own time, and everybody hated it because they were like, no, we're Eastern, we're different. So, in the short term, while yes, that keeps Byzantium independent, it would be very controversial and might itself lead to another conflict between the East and the West, or Byzantium having possibly another major civil conflict over this. In addition, at this point, Constantine, the emperor of Rome and Byzantium, was already, I believe, in his 50s at this point, and he did not have a wife, I don't believe, and he did not have a clear heir. That after he died, you might see another major civil conflict break out in Byzantium, which might mix in with this religious conflict and might just collapse them anyway, or put them in another state of such disrepair that they can easily be taken advantage of. But again, this is not guaranteed. You don't know that this would happen. We don't know it would go the other way. Maybe, hell, Constantine gets lucky, he gets a wife soon, he gets a child in his old age, and we have a clear heir, but it's just completely impossible to predict. But that would just be my clearest assessment on how that would continue to work out. This has been my telling of how I believe Constantinople, Byzantium, Rome, whatever you want to call it at this point in history, could have possibly won that battle, or at least survived through that battle that led to the fall of Constantinople, as when the city walls were broken through in that battle, it completely destroyed the city to a point where it was a shell of its former self and had to be rebuilt brick by brick by the Ottoman. That is how I believe it might have happened without Varna. Because with Varna, this is a completely different situation where it's way easier to have something like this happen, where Byzantium has a much bigger comeback, and the map might look very different. If you have enjoyed this, please like, subscribe, leave a comment, something. Especially, this video is going to be my magnum opus of my recent works. This is going to be by far the longest. It's probably going to take me a very long time to edit, or I might need to have relatively low editing quality just because I'm looking at the time right now. This is going to be probably about a 50-minute video. I'm not sure because that's just raw, so when you cut stuff down, space stuff out, it might turn out differently. But please, this has taken a lot of work, a lot of effort, and this is a direction that I'm trying to take the channel in, where I can actually talk to you guys. I'm using my voice, and I'm not using a script instead. I'm just talking about something I'm genuinely passionate about, because Byzantium is one of the things I find so incredibly interesting, and the fall of Constantinople, as its effects cannot be understated. I've said that multiple times, but it's completely true. So if you liked the video at all, please remember to like it. That would mean so much to me. And if you feel so inclined as to subscribe, I'm a tiny channel and would appreciate it more than you could understand. I'm only at 9 subscribers as of this uploading, and anything, absolutely anything would help. And leaving a comment is my favorite thing. People have left other comments in like my Bismarck video that I've taken to heart and really appreciate that feedback that you're able to give me. If eventually I redo that Bismarck video, because personally I think is interesting, I think it would be interesting to see what that situation would have gone. Not necessarily Bismarck being alive, but Bismarckian politics being continued. If I remake that, I'm definitely going to take those into consideration, those comments. So please comment, tell me what you're thinking, subscribe if you feel so inclined as to maybe see my next video, which I'm trying to churn them out quicker. It was a couple months of a break I was taking there, but in the last couple days I've really been trying to get this restarted again. And if you want to like, just because you like the video, to show my support, do that. And if you don't want to do any of them, that's absolutely fine. I'll keep living, you'll keep living, and we'll never even interact with each other. That's alright with me. So just please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Peace.